think we're all set. So this presentation is called systematic creativity. If you look at this line here, this gray line, this is like a continuum here. So on this far left side is chaos. Okay, so we're going to look at chaos and talk about that. And on the far right side is order. Okay, so this is like a continuum from order to chaos. And of course, we're going to define this basically as it's your operating environment, either created or inherited. Okay, so it could be the environment that you were born into. It could be the environment that you created yourself from your hard work or your bad work, whatever it might be. Your environment could be good or bad. It could be chaotic, or it could be full of order, and so there's a lot of different things that can be considered as chaos and order. And most people, if I brought up just these two terms, chaos and order, most people would their minds would jump to chaos being bad and order being good. And that's not really how I want to look at that today. It's not chaos bad, order good. I want to change the definitions just slightly with that. Chaos is really just the environment that doesn't have structure to it. There's no, it's low in predictability and low in certainty. The jungle. If you go to a jungle in Brazil, you're going to have a lot of chaos. Now, of course, there's some order there too, as far as just the natural or the animal kingdom, but there's a lot of chaos. Trying to drive your car through a jungle doesn't work very well because it's chaotic. But if you go to a city, there might be some order because there's streets and street signs and that type of thing. And so those can be examples of chaos and order. Another thing that can be an example of order might be Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Okay, he was a very ordered person, and he had just so much order going on and so many rules to follow that order can be a bad thing too when there's too much of it, and when it's not done when it's not done responsibly, basically. And so with chaos too. The world is a chaotic world, and so we're not going to be able to avoid that. Oftentimes, we just have to work within the confines of the chaos. When you open up a new business, there's chaos because you've got a lot of things going on. We have to close our Windsor store here going forward in a couple months, and it's going to be chaotic. There's going to be a lot of things. Now, there'll be some order too, and we'll all try to do the best we can to plan and have the systems in place and have everything good, but there's still going to be a certain amount of chaos to go with it as well. So just keep in mind that we live in a chaotic world, so knowing how to work within a chaotic environment is important, and we need to do that, and we just can't avoid it. It's going to happen some. And then also knowing how to work within an ordered environment, or helping things to become more orderly, but not more orderly than it needs to be. Sometimes you see people with maybe OCD tendencies that really side on the side of order here, and they take it too far. People that are perfectionistic, or people that really have some kind of fear causing them to really hug certainty as much as they can because they don't like uncertainty. And so that's kind of the spectrum that we're looking at here. So keep in mind, we're not quantifying these as good or bad or any value to them. It's just the difference in the environments that we're doing. Okay. So hopefully that all makes sense. All right. And so now let's look at the other thing. So this is really kind of what we call a 2x2. It's a 2x2 matrix where there's like 4 quadrants. And so, over on this left side, we have chaos, okay? And so this is all the chaos end, and that's the first screen that we talked about. Over on this side, this whole right side is order, okay? And now we're going to look at top to bottom. Top to bottom is a little bit different. So on the bottom, you've got low responsibility, and in the top quadrants here, you've got high responsibility. And then, so we're going to define responsibility as your ability to respond appropriately to your environment. Okay, makes sense? Your ability to respond appropriately to your environment. And whether it's chaotic or orderly, it's being able to respond appropriately. And so, looking at that, people with low responsibility typically they have an inability or an unwillingness to take ownership for their actions. As far as inability, that might be just a child that doesn't know how. You drop a child off in some random city in the middle of the city. It's going to be a chaotic place for that child, and they're just low in responsibility, so they don't know how to do that, and so they're going to be in this quadrant over here, and we're going to talk about that. And this is this can be a dangerous quadrant, of course, and hopefully none of you are dropping your children off into the middle of unfamiliar cities, or even familiar cities for that matter. And then as we move up the scale and responsibility increases, the top half here is this is the ability and willingness to take ownership for your actions, and it says ability and willingness. So this is, when you have the ability to, that doesn't necessarily mean you have the willingness to. There's a lot of grown adults that have the abilities to make good decisions and be responsible, but they're not willing to. They're stuck, or they just decide not to, or they lack self-discipline, or whatever it might be. And so it's really both. And there's also others that are very willing to be responsible, but they just lack the ability. You think of maybe adolescents or teenagers. Teenagers oftentimes will kind of straddle this. They have low responsibility in some areas, and other areas they can be pretty responsible, and so they kind of straddle this a little bit. But for the sake of our presentation here, we're going to look at these 4 different quadrants and kind of put this together and help you see some pretty cool patterns. All right, so let's see. All right, here we go. It's the same quadrants here. So let's look at the bottom left quadrant. So the bottom left quadrant here is so since it's on the left side, this really falls within a kind of an environment of chaos. Okay, so things, environment of low certainty and low predictability, and then low responsibility as well. So the people in this quadrant aren't necessarily highly qualified as far as being mature enough to really navigate within this quadrant here. And so we're going to call this the helpless zone. The helpless zone, because oftentimes people will feel, and we've all felt like this, and we probably often do feel like this in certain situations, and maybe even in life in general, oftentimes we feel this way, but we can feel helpless, like we don't know what's going on, we don't know what's happening, and we're not responsible yet. We haven't yet been equipped to really deal with the uncertain situation. We've all been in that situation. Maybe the first time you get into a car accident, it's like, okay, what they teach us in driver's ed, you're trying to find the different things, and you just feel a little bit helpless. Or maybe in times when there's a health emergency, or maybe a death in the family, you can feel helpless. There's uncertainty and hopelessness, and you're in the midst of chaos because you don't know what to do. And maybe it's not that you have low responsibility necessarily, but maybe you just don't have any control. Like there's nothing you can really do about the situation. And so there's nothing you can be responsible for. And so the helpless zone, just a few things about that is people tend to be, kind of agreeable, submissive, and dependent, kind of a little bit less aggressive overall, subdued, you could use that word too. People in the helpless zone can be more interested in self-preservation than lots of things. They're very protective at times. People in the helpless zone tend to deal with problems through escapism or flight. So they can kind of run away from things. When there's danger, they'll run away because they're not really responsible enough to take charge of the situation necessarily. And so they'll avoid it. And sometimes that's just the right thing to do. If you're in this situation, you're at the zoo and all the gates open up at one time and these dangerous animals are coming at you, you're in a helpless situation. And there's nothing you can do but run away. And so, this is an environment of uncertainty, and sometimes it can feel hopeless as well. So it can also cause anxiety and cause people to kind of freeze up and get stuck. And so this is a tough. We'll look at this more in context with the other ones once we talk through the other ones as well. So, but But this is kind of that low responsibility chaos zone. So the second quadrant here in the upper left is this is the creative zone. Now, not everybody that is in an environment of chaos is in a bad place. Some people love chaos. Some people love it when they are in a place that's new to them, in an environment that's new and nothing's familiar. You know, and people that really thrive in chaos, we're going to call them creatives. So this is the creative zone. Creative people, typically they're relational and they're empowering. This is the person in the midst of chaos. They're building relationships and they're empowering other people to bring a certain bit of expectation to the environment. These are people that think outside the box. They're brainstormers. When chaos happens, they don't panic. They just start thinking and they start working through things. They start communicating with people, and they start thinking outside the box. Sometimes they're visionaries and they have very good imaginations, and they think of solutions that other people don't think of because they're not strapped down to a bunch of rules and order. They're free thinkers, and so they can really be creative. Obviously, people that are in this creative zone can be very artistic in the way that they act and behave. They can be artistic in the way they communicate and they relate to people. They tend to be good nurturers, where they can grab a person and put their arm around them and help walk them through. People in this zone are pretty good at reaching down into the helpless zone and pulling them up and helping them to make sense of their chaos a little bit. And so that's the creative zone. And now we're going to jump over this little dividing line into the area of order. So now our environment is more ordered. And we're going to look at this third quadrant here, the upper right. This is the systematic zone. And so if you think of systems really kind of represent order, right? And we often need to operate in this zone. I mean, gosh, you can't have a pizza restaurant without having systems. Otherwise, every pizza would look different. It'd be a different weight. You know, if you just kind of let everybody do what they want, if you just let everybody just be creative and create their own pizzas, we would struggle in our business. So, the systematic zone. This is when we work within an environment with efficiency and productivity. People that in this zone tend to rely on cause and effect. They think through it. So if something happens, what makes this happen? Which is also the scientific method, and they use processes, step-by-step processes. Think of our red book. Think of the job aids that we have on the wall. Think of the portion charts that we have and the training materials. This is all stuff that's systematic that helps us to give some order to a lot of different things that need to have order. Otherwise, it would just be chaos. And so we've all worked in systematic zones, and we've also worked in chaotic places too. And so I like to work in systematic places better than chaos. Doesn't mean that I haven't learned how to handle myself in a chaotic world and be able to do better. But there's really something to be said for having good systems in place. So systematic zone also is teamwork. It's knowing the responsibilities for each person, working interdependence with each other. That's all part of the systematic zone too. That's why we talk people into position. That's why we do forecasting. This is why we communicate as we do, and we use the different modes of communication to make sure that there's that coordinated efforts and so on. And so the systematic zone is really important, and it really does bring a sense of order to our environment, which is very helpful. And then, of course, the last zone is the control zone, and this is this is the zone where it's highly controlled. There's the idea in the controlled zone is that we're pushing out all the chaos we can, and everything is just really tight. You think of the military. The military really they spend some time in the control zone, and they teach that as well. And there's certain things that really need to have a lot more control, with that. You think of a drill sergeant. You think of whatever. So there's some functionality in the control zone, but it can definitely be dysfunctional too, especially when the responsibility is really low. It often can be people that are driven and self-determined. Driven, not necessarily, maybe driven in a good way for some things, but sometimes it's self-driven too. People that are narcissistic sometimes can kind of fall within this control zone. People that are neurotic can fall within this control zone a little bit. We all probably know controlling people, right? People that they really need to have control, and they use authority at times. They're very independent. They don't like to follow rules. They have a self-preservation and power agenda where they're trying to gain something, and they're not afraid of somebody else losing if they can gain something. They also, we talked about flight and escapism with the helpless. On the control zone here, this is fight. So you've heard of fight or flight, right? The control zone, people that want to be controlling, they're going to fight because they're going to fight to get what they want, because they know what they want, and they're willing to go after it, and sometimes very recklessly. You think of the term a bull in a china shop. Sometimes that can kind of describe this environment, and so it's not always the healthiest place, but hopefully that all makes sense. We can go into that more, but I think you all have a pretty good idea what that is. So, all right, we're going to move to the next part, and this is going to help. This is going to be more of a connection. We're going to connect some of these so that you can kind of see how they work together and how they coordinate together, good or bad. So the first thing here is this helpless zone. It's a place where low confidence. Usually people in this helpless zone, they don't typically have a lot of confidence in themselves, and they often don't have a lot of confidence in other people, because it's chaos, right? It's unpredictable, and it's hard to have a lot of confidence in unpredictability. And then also low responsibility too. It's hard to have a lot of confidence in a low level of responsibility. And then oftentimes people kind of in this helpless zone can feel like victims. They can oftentimes they look around, and they can kind of see that maybe other people are doing fine, and they're working in systematic zone or control zone or creative zone, and they're not. They don't have any of that. They don't have the responsibilities. They're not at a level they can be responsible, and they don't have control. They just kind of feel like victims, like there's nothing they can do, and it really is a helpless feel. Oftentimes, people in poverty can feel like that. Victims of domestic abuse, in controlling relationships can feel like that. People from poorer countries can feel like that. There could just be all kinds of things. People that are, victims of crime or whatever it is can feel like that situation. So you can have, maybe sometimes people that have disabilities or just were born with different, levels of capabilities can feel a little bit helpless in victims too. So that's this quadrant here. Let's move up to the next one. So the creative zone, again, we're going back to the creative people. These are people that are relational and empowering. These people that are in this zone that can operate in chaos, but are creatives, they tend to be high trust. They tend to trust, and they tend to be trustworthy, certainly more than people in the helpless zone. People in the helpless zone can have a lot of struggles with trust. But the creative zone, they give people the benefit of the doubt. They reach a hand out and try to help people, and they show themselves to be trustworthy, and they do that through their care. These are people that they are not victims, even though they're in the middle of chaos and there's a lot of unpredictability and so on. They're the people that say, no, this is we can do something about this, and I'm going to help as many people as I can because I see a problem. And so creative people these will be the people that you'll see in the middle of a natural disaster. These are the ones that are, driving towards the disaster instead of running away from it. These are people that care. They're going to come to the rescue. They're going they can tend to be highly emotional, and they can't stand to see another person suffer, so they're going to be that person. So people in this zone are highly relational and creative, and they have a lot of care. So, all right. And then we'll move over to the upper right here, the systematic zone. And, again, these are efficient and productive people. They are typically, people in this zone are highly confident because they use the cause and effect principle to do what they do. If they're going to build a bridge, they're going to make sure they use the right materials to build a bridge. They're not going to just kind of wing it by just throwing some stuff up that they've never tested. They've tested it. They know what they're doing. It might be an engineer that works in the systematic zone, but they're highly confident what they're doing because it has scientific data behind it, and they can be sure of that. They can also be good relationally. They can be really good with candor. Systematic people typically, because they're so cause and effect driven, they're pretty honest and straightforward with people. They're the person that's going to say, look, if you keep going down this path, you're going to harm yourself. Or if you don't start doing this, using this kind of material when you're building your house, you're going to have problems down the road with this. They're straightforward, and they don't hem and haw a lot. They'll tell you the truth because they want it to be right. They want it to be right, and they want it to be accurate, and they want it to be sturdy, whatever it is. And these are the people that if they're managing your restaurant, they're the ones that saying you absolutely have to weigh and measure every single pizza because our food cost is going to be off, and we need to be right on target with our food cost because that's what we're being paid to do. And they're very intentional about making sure that the rules are being followed and the systems are being used. So that's the systematic zone here, and this is the people of Candor. This last here, the control zone. Oftentimes the control zone, because they're low in responsibility, they tend to not accept responsibility. Everything is somebody else's fault. If it's a person just that's young, maybe they just haven't learned how, or they're just not mature enough yet. You're not going to expect a 12-year-old boy to take responsibility like you're going to see a 25-year-old boy, right? It's part of the growing process. But sometimes it can be a president of the United States. How many presidents have we seen blame the president before them for the mess that they inherit? How many presidents have we seen with narcissistic tendencies as well? That's fairly common in politics. And so, but there's a lot of blamers out there, and they come in all walks of life. There's rich ones, poor ones, powerful ones, not so powerful ones. But they love control, and they love to put their thumb on things and hold it down so that they can control what's happening. And they tend to be low trust also. When you can't trust other people, the only alternative is to control them. Okay, so they tend to not trust other people, and they tend to not be trusted. So sometimes people can use control to a too high of a degree in order to get things done. So, all right, so those are the four quadrants and how they kind of stand on their own. We're gonna look at how they mix in a little bit. So, all right. So the helpless or the victim. Here's the thing. When you're in a chaotic environment and you feel helpless and you feel like there's nothing you can do, you can feel like other people are responsible for your needs. Okay? And there's a lot of people, you just think of our country, there's a lot of people that feel that somebody else is responsible for meeting their needs. And these are low responsibility people. They're not people that are kind of standing on their own 2 feet, so to speak, and making sure that they're self-sufficient. And then, of course, the control zone over here, people in the control zone, these are people that say, you are responsible for my needs also. So it's the same message, but it looks a little bit different. They're saying, these are the ones that, like, for instance, if I was a control freak and if I thought like this, and one of my partners were to say, hey, how come your store is struggling? Your stores are struggling in this and this and this. I would be the one looking at my manager saying, you're responsible for my needs being met. It's your responsibility that your store isn't working. It's your responsibility that I'm not making as much money as I'm making or whatever. It's so people in the control zone, they tend to not take responsibility, but they like to blame other people. And so, but here's what happens, and maybe you guys, maybe this will make sense. But oftentimes when you have a person that is really controlling, whether it's somebody neurotic or just a boss or whatever it is, they will have control for a while, and then whatever the situation is, because you're a blamer, because you're controlling, it can unravel quickly. Think about a person that is a manager of a restaurant that's kind of a dictator, and they're pointing their finger at their employees, and they have control, and those employees will do what they say because they're afraid. Well, it won't be long if you're in control and you're in control and you're blaming, then you might have everybody walk out on you. You may have everybody in your store leave because they don't like to work for you. And now all of a sudden you go from being in control and you flip all the way over here to helpless. It's like now, if you're a controlling manager, now you're a helpless manager because you got nobody to help you. And now you're in the middle of chaos. And so now you're still a blamer, but now you're a blamer and a victim. And so you can go back and forth between these two zones rather easily. Or maybe a person that kind of lives in the helpless zone, the victim that gets bullied. You take their lunch over and over, and every day on the way to school, they get their lunch taken away, and the day comes along where they're hungry and they've just had it. And so they just go ballistic on the bully and knock their teeth out, and now all of a sudden they're in control. And because they realize that I don't have to be helpless, I can be controlling instead, and you see that all the time. You see in environments where people are being controlled, and then when they could easily move into an environment where they get to be in control. You think of like victims of domestic violence or sexual abuse or emotional abuse. Often those victims as children become the persecutors as adults, right? They become the blamers. They become the controlling factors, the abusers as adults. And people that really kind of flop back and forth between the helpless zone and the control zone, it's because they don't know anything in between. They live in extremes. And but it's still a very low responsibility place to live wherever you're at, whether you're in the control zone or the helpless zone. And so this middle piece here just kind of shows that the victim and blamer you can cycle through that. You can be both of them 1 minute and be one and the other, but it's a cycle. You just go through this, and then and usually it's just a downward spiral that doesn't really go anywhere good. A lot of times people that really don't learn responsibility, they have to keep starting over. If it's a job that they're in and they go through these cycles, they end up getting behind on something because they're not being responsible, and they make a mess out of things, and then they leave and they go to another place of employment, and they start over, and they'll work until they get into the same pattern until they have to start over again. And people that live below this line here in the low responsibility area, you tend to see them starting over many times again and again because they're stuck in this cycle. All right, I'm gonna keep going here. Now let's look at this. Let's look at the top here. Something really interesting happens up here too. I don't know if you've ever heard of people talk about the kind of the relationship between care and candor. So care is when people matter to you, when you care about their needs. You want people to do well. You want people to succeed. And candor is, well, it's telling the truth. When you're candor, you're telling people honest. Sometimes candor can look like tough love. And tough love really actually incorporates care and candor. Sometimes you have to communicate with people, and you have to tell them something that's going to hurt them, and you have to have candor. But the reason you do it is because you care about them. Think about a person with a substance abuse, and you have to approach them and you have to confront them and say, look, you need to seek help, and I'm going to help you get there, but you cannot keep going on the route that you're going on now, and I'm going to put some boundaries in place to make sure that you don't keep harming yourself. Okay, that's That's how care and candor work together. And we do this in the restaurant industry too, right? If we care about our employees and we care about what they think, and an employee starts becoming late on a regular basis, if we just care about them and that's it, and we're not good with the candor part, we might just let them slide because we don't like confrontation. A lot of times people in the creative zone there, they don't necessarily like confrontation. They like the relational part of it. They like the fuzzy stuff and the good stuff. But sometimes if they're not very good at the systematic part, they'll let some things slide and they won't have quite the backbone that they should. And by the same token, if somebody is really high on candor, but maybe they don't have the filter in place and they don't necessarily care as much, they're going to step on a lot of people's toes and insult some people and make them feel bad because they lack the care, because they're really just trying to get things done, right, in a systematic order, and a person might be kind of getting in their way. So it's really important to understand that there's a relationship here with care and candor. And so this becomes magic when a person can straddle, have one foot in the creative zone and one foot in the systematic zone. As a leader, when you develop skills and you can do both of these, your effectiveness as a leader skyrockets. You truly can be far more effective than just if you're a creative or if you're just systematic. Okay, systematic and creative both are they're good on their own, and there's certainly places outside of leadership where it's great to have somebody. You think of an engineer. A lot of engineers aren't necessarily paid for their care or their creativity. They're just following rules and scientific laws. And of course, the same thing here. Creative without systems can be a problem, but systematic people and creative people are good, but they're not great. Okay, they're not the great leaders that we're going to focus on here in just a second. So keep in mind that when you have one foot in both of these, you are far more effective when you have care and candor working together with there. And so some of you I know exactly what I'm talking about, because I've seen some of you kind of grow through time. Maybe you're more systematic and you learn to care more, or maybe you're more caring and you learn the system. And so everybody can grow and learn to kind of straddle these two areas and get better. So hopefully this is helpful. And the higher level of responsibility that we have, the more responsible we become, the better we can get at this. So all right, move on to the last thing. So this line here, this is the responsibility line. And so it's really important that for people in the helpless zone, they need to like follow this arrow here. They need to get over this line, this responsibility, and really become responsible. This is when maybe somebody that's got some skills, restaurant skills, but maybe they're even in management. They got to management somehow, but they're not making things happen because they're in the helpless zone. They have to be fully responsible and get up here in order to really make a difference. Or maybe the control zone, they need to realize that you can't be a boss. You just can't be a boss. They're just not really welcome in our company, right? You can be up here. You can be a good manager of stuff and systems and things. But then you also got to learn the creative zone too. You got to be part of that. And then these arrows too just show how we got to come together at this bullseye here in the middle with the care and candor. And that's really important. But responsibility is a big part of that. So, okay. Last slide, I believe. And so let's look at this. So here's the responsibility line. So when we're below the responsibility line, typically we have not taken full responsibility for our lives yet. It could be because we're just younger children. It could be because we're adults and we just haven't gotten there because we got stuck as teenagers, or it could be for a lot of different reasons. But our maturity level isn't to the point where we've crossed this line yet and become responsible. And so leaders that are in the helpless zone or the control zone, either one of those two, they are really in the bottom 50% of all of the leaders. You've heard me talk about the 80-20 rule, right? That bottom 80% is the mediocre, right? Well, people that are in the helpless zone or the control zone, they're in the bottom 50%. So they're not just in the bottom 80%, they're in the bottom 50%. So these are the ones that really are experiencing repeated problems over and over and over with their success and their personal happiness with their position they're just not responsible enough to be able to be successful. And until they do cross that line of responsibility, they'll remain in this area struggling. So so the creative zone and the systematic zone, then they are in the top 50% because they're good. Remember, I said they're good but not great. They can be in the top 50% because I'd rather work for a person that's really systematic and does things well, rather than a controlling person, right? If you're gonna side on order, I'd rather be in a systematic place. Over here too, rather than being in an environment of chaos with helplessness, I'd rather be in an environment of chaos with creative people. And so creative people are just better to work for than helpless people, of course. That really should go without saying. And then we've got our little lines here that we divided up here. And then this middle zone here, this is the leadership zone. And this is where the systematic zone and the creative zone collide and overlap, really. Not collide, they overlap and complement each other. And so so you can see, this section here and this section here, this is all the 80%. And then this top 20%, these are the people that are really figured this out. They're creative and they're systematic. And so that's the reason why this presentation is called systematic creativity, because that's the intersection where creativity and systematic cross. That's your sweet spot. So, and it doesn't happen without responsibility, and it doesn't happen without learning these two quadrants as well. So you're typically going to be stronger naturally in one of these two quadrants, so you have to spend some time working on the other. But once you can straddle both, you will be a leader that's needs to be reckoned with. So that is all I got. So I'm going to stop sharing here and see if anybody has any thoughts or questions.